Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Eugene from Apex Investment Consulting South Africa. Just a bit of background on who we are. We provide asset consulting services to numerous institutions and intermediaries in South Africa, including your intermediary. And we look at a range of tailor-made portfolios, anything from income-generating portfolios to high growth, and all the portfolios in between as well. We continuously assess the markets with input from various big institutions globally to look at various asset classes, asset allocation, and then we also look at fund managers in South Africa and globally that we think most appropriate in your investment portfolio. Recent developments in the Middle East have sparked sharp reaction on markets and obviously oil prices, which you all know by now. And we're going to try to unpack this a little bit more to make better sense of how this may impact on your portfolio. At the request of your intermediary, we will bring you with an update on our most recent views and what we've implemented in some of these portfolios and see how it can work best for our clients. I'm joined this morning by our Managing Director, Pierre de Klerk from Apex Investment Consulting. Pierre is a CFA and he's got almost 3 decades of experience in managing client portfolios. So it's really great to have Pierre with us this morning as well. Pierre, thank you so much for joining us to unpack all this noise that we see in the news this morning and try to make sense of how this impact on our investments.
Thanks, Eugene. Thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, I'm glad to be able to present. We're going to talk about the conflict this morning, as you mentioned, and I thought right up front, I should say, why we spend time talking about this. We don't normally spend a lot of time talking about politics in our presentations, but this is different. This is the Middle East. It influences the oil price, and it will influence inflation and interest rates and the world economy. And in so doing, it'll also influence our portfolios and our investments. And therefore, we will focus a bit on what is going on and what the implications might be. So, as you already said in the introduction, and as we all know, there is a war in the Middle East between the US and Israel and Iran. And as you can see on the map of the Middle East, Iran is fairly centrally located, and it's very close to many of its neighbors, and it is quite close to Israel. The distance between Israel and Iran is anything between 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers, so it's Cape Town to Bloemfontein or Cape Town to Johannesburg, and a ballistic missile can travel that in about 12 minutes. So that is part of the reason, in all likelihood, why the war happened in the first place. The Israelis and the US were obviously very concerned about Iran's nuclear program, and if we follow the official reasons of why the attack on Iran was launched, then it was to curtail that nuclear program, because Israel are fairly close and were quite concerned about that. So what has happened so far this month? The US and Israel attacked Iran. They were very successful in the first number of days. They followed what is called a decapitation strategy. They killed many of the senior Iranian leadership, including the supreme leader. And I think the US and Israel thought that it would be over in a relatively short few days, but unfortunately it's dragged out. And the Iranians have responded by attacking US bases and assets in the Middle East, in the bordering countries, and also other infrastructure. So the Iranian strategy seems to be to put pressure on the US and the world, essentially, by attacking oil refineries, civilian infrastructure, airports in the neighboring countries, and in so doing, putting indirect pressure on the US, getting those countries to put pressure on the US to stand back. This map just shows where in the neighboring countries in the Gulf there are US military bases, and these are also being attacked by Iran, as I mentioned. As I mentioned, they're also attacking civilian infrastructure. So this is a picture of a residential building that was struck in Dubai. And clearly part of the Iranian strategy is to put this indirect pressure on the neighbors, and in so doing on the US by attacking not only military assets, but also civilian assets. This graph shows the attacks coming from Iran since the war started on the 28th of February. And as you can see, it started with hundreds of projectiles and drones being fired at Israel and at the neighbors, but it has scaled down, it has tapered down. And this data goes up to the 19th. Now, the question is whether Iran is holding back some of its military hardware, holding that in stock or in reserve, or whether they are actually running out. Clearly, the US and Israeli attacks on military installations in Iran, on their drone manufacturing capability, on their missile batteries and so forth, have done damage. But the question is, is this graph a reflection of Iran running out of capability, or are they actually holding some of that back? And a few days ago, there was a report that said the Israelis estimate that Iran might still have 30 to 40% of its military, its missile and drone capability available. So it is a bit of a question mark currently how long the Iranians can sustain this before they are militarily, at least, basically out of options. This graph is the attacks on the UAE. The next graph shows the attacks on all the countries around them in the Middle East, and it has also tapered down, as you can see, but it seems to have stabilized from the 10th of March onwards. So it's not really tapering further down meaningfully. And what is also evident, if you look at the red blocks, is that the attacks directly launched at Israel seem to have kind of picked up a bit relative to the attacks on the other countries in the Gulf. So this is a serious conflict. It's an existential conflict for Iran, and that makes it very volatile and uncertain. And it might mean that they, do drastic things. And clearly they are trying to do that by blocking the Strait of Hormuz, through which a quarter of the world's oil flows. And we'll talk a bit about that in a moment's time. There is a bit of a financial problem, which is not ideal for the US, and that is that this is a very expensive war to wage, because the way the Iranians are waging it with drones that are relatively cheap, but the US and Israel counter this with interceptor missiles that cost 20 times or 50 times what the drones cost, mean that this is an expensive war for the US. The estimates are that so far they've spent about 17 billion, and they are planning to ask for another 200 billion of budget, not necessarily for this war only, but for military restocking and build out. So wars, and this one is turning out to be quite expensive for the US in a financial and economic sense. The concern is obviously that this could drag out, and the clip on the right-hand side refers to what Donald Rumsfeld said in 2002 when the US invaded Iraq. And at the time, he said he doesn't know whether it's going to take 5 days or 5 weeks or 5 months. He doesn't think it's going to take longer. And ultimately, it took them more than 5 years, I think 6 or 7 years, to extract themselves. And the current politicians are saying something similar, which is quite concerning, that they might be making the same mistake as what they made in the early 2000s. I mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. I'll show you where exactly it is on a map now, but it's an important naval strait through which a quarter of the world's oil is transported, and Iran has effectively blockaded that, or they have effectively kind of stopped transfer through the strait, and you can see that in the line that's basically dropped to zero. A small number of ships that are friendly countries to Iran are currently getting through, and the official communication from Iran is that the strait is open to all ships except those of their enemies. But because there's no insurance available for ships, and because there's the risk of rocket attacks and kind of boat attacks on small boat attacks on big oil tankers, there's basically very little boats traversing the strait. Currently, here you can see on the map where the Strait of Hormuz is. It is it's definitely a choke point. So there's lots of oil tankers trapped in the Gulf at the moment, wanting to exit through the strait. It's having impact on the oil production in the rest of the countries, because they need to taper that back because they don't have storage facilities. They need to ship it. They're running out of storage capacity, and therefore they need to reduce their production of oil, which will have negative consequences. There is another choke point that is currently not a flashpoint, but it is a risk, and that's the choke point, or the strait here at the bottom of the Red Sea. Another almost 10% of world oil gets moved through here, and this is where the Houthis in Yemen have caused problems in the past and operated. Now, they haven't joined the current conflict or the current war, but the fear is, or the risk is, that if Iran were to activate the Houthis as a proxy force friendly to them, and they were to attack shipping in the Red Sea and maybe choke off this strait coming out of the Red Sea, then more than a third of world oil is being restricted from flowing naturally. So it is a concern. And you can see it on this graph. Strait of Hormuz accounts for about 20 million barrels of oil in transit per day, and the strait at the bottom of the Red Sea almost another 10. So a total of almost 30 million barrels of oil on a normal day, and that has now reduced to virtually nothing. So it is a serious concern for the world economy. It's not just about oil. There's also other commodities moving through the Persian Gulf and through the Strait of Hormuz, and a big one is fertilizer, or the input elements, compounds into fertilizers, things like urea and so forth. And fertilizer, of course, if that becomes less available and a lot more expensive, will have a direct knock-on effect on food inflation. And that is also something that needs to be taken into account. The graph on the left-hand side shows how the oil price have historically behaved during periods of crisis that impacts the oil price. And you can see the Gulf War, for example, the strike on Venezuela, the Arab Spring, the Second Gulf War. On average, 60 days after the start of a big conflict that touches the oil market, the oil price is about 23% up, 20 to 25% up. That's the green line on the graph. Currently, on day 20 or just after day 20 of the current conflict, the oil price has gone up by about 40%, anything between 40 and 50%. So this is a serious concern, and it is a serious impact on the oil price relative to history, and therefore it's important that this gets resolved rather sooner than later. But suffice to say, we need to keep a very close eye on this and be ready to take portfolio action if we think this is going to really become a dragged out and a big problem. How high does the oil price need to be to cause an economic recession in the US and a bear market? This graph tries to answer that. The graph on the top side shows the S&P 500, and it shows the periods in the past of recessions and bear markets. And below, it shows the year-on-year change in the oil price. So what the message of the graph is that when the oil price crosses that dotted line, which is 100% increase, so a doubling of the oil price, that is normally a very good sign that the world economy is going to suffer significant damage, and that they are likely going to lead to a recession, and that typically leads to a serious equity bear market. So we're not quite there yet. As I mentioned a bit earlier, the oil price coming from $70 or $60 to $70 before the conflict that started at the beginning of March, is up about 50% now. Let's round it up. Oil price is about 50% up, so not quite at the doubling level, which is good news for now. But clearly the risk is, if it goes much higher, we must keep in mind that if the oil price hits the $140, $150 per VAT level and stays there for a period of time, that will be very, very serious news for the world economy. So what are some of the better news points? What we're saying now is a lot of risk and bad news so far. One of the better news points is that the world economy is less dependent on oil than what it was historically. So as the world becomes more, or the world economy becomes more services oriented as opposed to goods oriented, think of tech and Facebook and Meta and Google and Amazon. Those are services businesses. They are less exposed to the oil price or to producing things. It's a service economy, and as that have grown in importance in the world, the reliance on oil has reduced. So that's a point of reasonably good news, but the world is still quite dependent on oil. We can't underestimate it. Think of petrol in motor vehicles, think of jet fuel, traveling around the world, shipping goods around the world. That is all very energy intensive. Another important point is that the US is a big producer of oil. They're actually a net exporter of oil, and the marginal production cost for West Texas Intermediate oil is about $60. So as the oil price goes higher, forced by the problems in the Middle East, there's a big incentive for shale producers in the US to produce more and to even produce at higher cost, because they can now sell it at a margin or at an improved margin. So the US has the capacity to move up the curve and to produce more in the medium to the longer term. That'll be a mitigating factor. One potential problem for the US in the short term is that they did not replenish their strategic oil reserves after the Ukraine war happened or started between Russia and Ukraine. There was also a oil crash or oil crunch then, and the US released oil from their strategic reserves when the Ukrainian war happened, from 700 million barrels all the way down to 350 million barrels. They have done a bit of restocking, but they haven't properly restocked. So in the short term, this is a problem, the fact that their reserves are lower going into the current conflict compared to before the Ukrainian conflict. So it's not all about oil. There's going to be potentially second order effects. There might be fuel inflation increase. Coal as a supplement for oil might become more expensive. We've already talked about oil directly. All those will lead to goods inflation. And also the Middle East economies are taking damage currently, and they will probably withdraw some of their sovereign capital that's invested in the rest of the world back to the Middle East to help their own economies. And that might also have an impact on the rest of the world. So what has the market reaction been so far? Markets hasn't completely fallen out of bed. So we can say it's been reasonably well behaved. There's been weakness, but it's not been as dramatic as what we've seen in previous crises. And I'll show you on the graph what I mean by that now. The oil price has obviously moved up significantly. We've touched on that. But the yields, the bond yields, hasn't really moved up massively aggressively. You can see the 2 and the 10-year bond yields in the US are basically at the same levels where they were in April last year when the Trump tariffs were announced, and that was also a point where inflation became a concern. The bond yields are pretty much kind of around those levels. Equity markets have come down, but again, has not fallen out of bed, and I'll show you a bit more detail now. And the dollar has strengthened. So the dollar, in a sense, have behaved as one expected, because in previous historic crises, money tends to flow towards the dollar as a safe haven when there is geopolitical problems in the world, and that has happened. It's also weakened the gold price a bit in the short term or in the recent past. which is a reflection of the stronger dollar. It is a bit of a surprise given the geopolitical risk that the gold price weakened a bit, but we think if this drags out and if inflation becomes a bigger concern, the gold price will likely continue moving upwards. This is the World Equity Index. It has come down, but as you can see, it's not at the lows that we had earlier in 2025, around the time of the tariff news or the tariff announcements. Also not the 2022 drawdown, and also not COVID. So although we've had some market weakness, it's still within the norms of what we experienced in the last 5 years, even though it was a volatile 5 years behind us. S&P 500, similar picture, has come off. It's in the high single digits of negative returns, but it hasn't collapsed to these previous levels of the last 5 years. This is the All Share Index. Emerging markets, and South Africa is part of that, have come off more. Emerging markets is obviously viewed as a riskier asset class compared to developed markets, and we kind of down 10% or a bit more. Obviously, the rand has also blown out a bit, which is not good news, or weakened. I shouldn't say blown out, but weakened a bit. So we have suffered a bit more than the US and the developed markets, but we are basically in line with other emerging markets. The one difference, or the one standout, is China. China is quite an insular economy. The mainland shares, the CSI 300, you can see here on the right-hand side, they've had a period of weakness before this year, but in this period of Middle Eastern conflict, the Chinese equity market hasn't actually come off like the rest of the world. It's actually stayed quite buoyant, and some of our portfolios and some of our client portfolios have exposure to China, and on a relative basis, that would have helped us a bit. This graph shows what typically happens, historically speaking, when you have a geopolitical shock. The market does experience some stress, but later on it picks up and it improves again. It takes a bit longer when it involves oil. The orange and the purple line are periods in the past where the oil price was part of the geopolitical problem, and you can see markets tend to stay a bit weaker for longer when that is involved. When oil is not involved, markets actually recovered quite quickly. This graph is similar. It looks at 57 major geopolitical events from the past, and it shows you from the day that the risk event or the geopolitical event happens, 150 days further, so about 6 months further, where the market is. And this includes all sorts of geopolitical events: 9/11, terrorist attacks, JFK assassination, and geopolitical risks that influence the oil price. All of it is in this average line. And as you can see, markets eventually recover and process that geopolitical news. So we mustn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We must keep a perspective as to how these things typically work. This is a bit of a decision tree in terms of what might happen in Iran, and we are now in this bottom quadrant where it is a situation where the oil price is up and there is a bit of risk off in the market, and we will now need to work through that. What about China? China will come under pressure because much of their oil comes from Iran and Venezuela, so this might be some of the US's kind of big strategic motivation with continuing with the war against Iran, that they know that they will also be putting pressure on China. But just like the world have become less dependent on oil, so too China has become less dependent on oil over the last number of decades. So one must keep that in mind. It is an unpopular war in the US, so that's going to put pressure on Donald Trump. There are midterm elections in November in the US, and it's not a popular war with voters. As you can see on the left-hand side, the question to voters were, should the US intervene? And the vast majority across the political divide said no, they don't think it's a good idea. If asked what is important to them, inflation is the most important thing for US voters. Foreign affairs and the US interfering in the rest of the world is actually a very low priority for voters. So this is not a good backdrop for the Republican Party and for Donald Trump going into the midterm elections if inflation is going to be much higher because of the oil price. And this also gives some indication that there will be urgency for Donald Trump to look for an off-ramp out of the current conflict, so to speak, because he does not want to go into the midterm elections with high inflation, higher interest rates, and pressure on US consumers. Then he is likely to do quite poorly. So that's maybe another point that we can feel hopeful about, that the US will look to wind this down at some point. How do we look at this? Our process is to look at what we call bottom-up factors that are valuations of asset classes, but also top-down factors. And top-down factors are economic variables like growth, inflation, interest rates, and so forth, and also geopolitical risk. And what we've already had in our assessment, in our process, was a very negative score for geopolitical risk. So we had already, before the conflict, at the start of the year, for various reasons, maintained a very negative score for geopolitical risk. And this led us to not be too aggressive with clients' portfolios. So we weren't overweight equity going into the crisis, and it was mainly a reflection of the fact that we felt there is a lot of geopolitical risk in the system. So that this has helped us, it's given us the right signal going into the crisis to not be overweight exposed to equity. We were neutral in our portfolios. Why weren't we lower in equity at the start of the year? Because things were looking on the up. The world economy was doing better. Here you can see at the end of last year, most of the PMI, Purchase Manager Index numbers, were above 50. They were in the green. So the world economy was doing better at the start of the year. Earnings expectations for the US and emerging markets and South Africa were moving up. So things were improving in the first month or so of the year and the latter part of last year. So this, we hope, will not be completely derailed by the higher oil price and potentially higher inflation. That is the crux. We don't want this improving economic backdrop to deteriorate too dramatically. Emerging markets were doing better last year and into this year. So we also look for this not to be derailed, but we need to keep a keen eye on the impacts on emerging markets. Emerging market equities are cheaper than developed market equities. So although the current risk-off environment are hurting emerging markets more, if we do get a resolution of the conflict and things calm down, emerging markets are better valued and better positioned to deliver returns compared to more expensive developed markets. So that's also something to keep in mind. What might happen with markets and with asset classes? If you look at the left-hand side, one thing that might happen is that information technology or tech shares, which is the blue line, which has been lagging the old economy stocks for the latter part of last year and into this year, might actually start doing better again. So we expect the blue line, which is the tech index, to maybe do better and the old economy shares to do less well. And the reason is the tech sector is not as exposed to the oil price as the manufacturing sector. That's one thing that might happen. Another thing that might happen is that as the oil price peaks, whenever it peaks, that is also typically the peak in bond yields. So when we think we're at the peak of the oil price, that is the time to buy bonds, because from that point onwards, you typically get good capital appreciation on bonds as the yields drop. So there will be opportunity for bonds sometime in the future when the oil price peaks and start moving down again. Gold, which is the yellow line on the left-hand graph, is something that typically does well when there's geopolitical uncertainty and risk. It's a safe haven asset. It has weakened a bit now because of the stronger dollar, but as I mentioned earlier, we do think if inflation moves up, gold is likely to continue doing well. And in our house view and in our client portfolios, we generally have some gold exposure, at least on a look through to the South African equities, because the gold sector is a 10 to 15% portion of South African equities, and most South African asset managers will have some gold and gold mining exposure in their equity portion. Currency, the rand has weakened a bit from when this graph was done. We're around about the 1710 or 1720 level now, so we're about there. It has weakened, but the rand is not out of bounds. The rand is actually still weaker than what it should be. In theory, the rand should be around the 14.5%, 15% level if inflation and rates stay where they are. If inflation move up a bit, then you can argue for a weaker rand, but the rand doesn't need to be at 20. The rand is kind of, if we assume inflation is moving up, then the rand is probably kind of close to fair value levels currently. And if inflation stays where it is, or go up and come down kind of soon thereafter, so it's not structurally higher, then the rand can actually come back to the 16 rand level in due course, because over the long term, we do think the dollar is going to go into another long period of dollar weakness, and that is typically good for emerging markets. Emerging markets outperform when the dollar weakens. This is the long-term dollar cycle. Since 2010, we've had a strong dollar for a decade, but last year it seemed as if we were at the start of a next longer-term down leg for the dollar. It's been interrupted now by the war and the fact that money is flowing towards the dollar. But once that subsides, we do think we're going to progress on another longer term down leg for the dollar. How are we responding? We are not knee-jerking or throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Most of our positioning are at neutral. We have maybe small overweights on the SA side that we came into the year with, but we are not massively overweight. And similarly, we don't want to cut equity exposure or risk asset exposure dramatically now, because if there is a truce or resolution of the conflict, the market will very likely give some sort of a relief rally, and there'll be an upward movement. And one does not want to slash equity in your portfolios now, and then there's a resolution in the next number of weeks because Donald Trump starts focusing on the midterms, and then the market bounces back out of relief and you miss out on that. That's why we are not kind of overreacting, and we feel that -3 score, which is our maximum negative score that we gave the geopolitical risk, is reflecting correctly the risk that is currently prevalent in our process and in our house view. If it wasn't for that, we would have been much more overweight equity by now, but because of that, we weren't. We were close to the neutral level. So in summary, what do we have in client portfolios, like your portfolios, to help against the current volatility that we are experiencing? We have some fixed income exposure, and the flexible managers that we use in South Africa to manage fixed income for us will move the duration of the fixed income shorter, so they will protect capital. They will not be in the long end of the bond yield curve. They will manage that more conservatively, so that will protect portfolios. And most of our client portfolios have a buffer of SA fixed income and a small overweight to that, so that will certainly help. What will help is the fact that we weren't aggressively overweight going into the current crisis. We were neutral or only very marginally overweight on the SA side. What will also help is the gold exposure that we have in portfolios, both where we have it directly and where clients are indirectly exposed to it through SA asset managers who invest in the SA gold companies. And then lastly, I spoke about the fact that China is holding up quite well in the current conflict, and to the extent that portfolios have exposure to China directly or indirectly, that will also, on a relative basis, be a bit of a buffer. So we do feel there are some elements in portfolios that will assist to buffer our portfolios a bit. Apart from that, we don't want to overreact and knee-jerk and significantly reduce equity exposure now. The volatility experienced so far is unfortunate, but it's to be expected, but it's not out of the order if you compare it to previous drawdowns that we've had in the last 5 years. And we don't want to be more underweight, because if a resolution is achieved, then the market will very, very most likely give some sort of a relief reaction. And we don't want to be materially on the sidelines when that happens. So it is a difficult situation. We need to manage it carefully. We are keeping an eye on this daily, doing all the analysis, doing all the research. If things deteriorate much worse, which we hope don't happen, we will act. We will be more defensive with portfolios. But for now, we feel we're reflecting the right kind of reflection of the risk in our process through our in our portfolios through our process. I hope this helps. Thanks, Eugene, for the opportunity to share this, and we will keep you updated.
Pierre, thank you very much for this update. It's been extremely valuable indeed. I'm sure this helped a lot of our clients and investors out there to answer some of those pressing questions. Very important to look at the overall picture and understand how portfolios are positioned. And I think you summarized it very well. To our investors out there, if you have any questions, please get in touch with your intermediary, and we can try to field as many of his questions as we can going forward. We'll keep you updated. We keep your intermediaries updated on a regular basis. And I think the main message for now is stay calm. You see how quickly things can change, and it can change for the better as well on the drop of a dime. Pierre, thank you so much for your time this morning. It was really great to get this update, and we'll chat again in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eugene.